All right, welcome folks. Thank you for joining us here this morning. I'm going to get started here in just a minute and give a minute or two for everyone to be able to sign in and join us. So get started in just a moment. All right, well, I will get the ball rolling here for everyone. Again, thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Steve Spatz. I am a residential energy consultant and account manager here with Efficiency Vermont. And I do a lot of work with the codes. I've done a lot of work over my time here with Efficiency Vermont and doing code trainings for builders, architects, homeowners, municipal officials across the board. So today we're going to cover the content, general overview of the residential building energy standards and its application in general, and as well as how it overlaps and intertwines with the work of municipal officials and local municipal obligations in regard to the code. So I'll be going through, I've got about an hour or so worth of content, I think here, and I'll make sure to stop throughout to make time for questions. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand or put a message in the chat, and we'll call on you to answer those questions. I'll make sure, and we do have time at the end to be able to have some conversation as well. I certainly welcome it. This really is the best way to kind of give you the most out of this is to have some conversation and dialogue so that you can have questions answered and get the most out of this. So let's get started. So what we're going to cover today is some direct provisions as they land on municipal and local officials under the Act 89 changes that came into play a few years ago. We'll cover why Vermont has energy codes and what they cover, municipal benefits, and why the codes exist, what the intent is, and what the outcome can be as we have more buildings built and renovated to meet the standards. Actually go through the details of what the basic tenets of what the code requires, cover resources and assistance for code interpretations, code support, things that Efficiency Vermont does, and other things at the state level, and then some other further information to support local officials in implementing the code. So the one thing I looks like I missed putting it in here, but I'll just mention it now, is that there are throughout the slides here some direct references to the code itself, which is the copyrighted material of the International Code Council, the ICC. So those portions of the training here today that do reference the code language itself is the copyright protected by the ICC that Efficiency Vermont has permission to share. So that being said, we have the code was enacted in 1997 as a state of Vermont's residential building energy standard. So the code itself, the majority of it is built on the framework of the International Energy Conservation Code, which is a model code that was developed and maintained by the ICC that I just mentioned. And as is standard with the International Energy Conservation Code, it is again, a model code that exists throughout the US, and states or municipalities, local jurisdictions have the opportunity to adopt the International Energy Conservation Code in whole or in part. Most states and jurisdictions will adopt the IECC with modifications and specific additions that are specific to their climate, to their local requirements, et cetera. And that's the condition here in Vermont. So The RBES code is built on the IECC, and a lot of the language and content comes from the IECC with Vermont-specific additions and exemptions and provisions in the code. Vermont's code is self-certified by the builder or owner of the building. So the state of Vermont does not have code officials. There's not a regulatory agency that oversees the application of the code or the adherence to the code. So it is up to the person building the building to verify and validate compliance with the code. The code is typically revised on a 3-year cycle, and that involves many layers of public review and input and stakeholder meetings. The current code, which came into effect as of September 1st of 2020, is the latest revision and version of the code, previously coming from the 2015 version. So there was a 5-year gap this time around rather than a 3-year gap. So any projects that were, any residential projects that were started, site work, starting the construction process prior to September 1st, 2020, do not need to meet the current requirements. They need to meet the requirements of the 2015 code. But any project that, started digging a hole and has been underway for construction since September 1st of last year needs to meet the current standards. So the basics of the codes, they set minimum efficiency standards for building envelope performance, health and safety, durability, indoor air quality for new buildings and renovations. So the RBES exists in tandem with the commercial version of the codes, the commercial building energy standard. We'll not be going into that in detail today. So there is a distinction between residential use and commercial use. So there's 2 basic components to the code. There's the actual performance standard, which is the meat of the code, what you need to do to build a code compliant building. So those are the minimum standards for components and construction practices. And then the second piece of it is the actual certification component, where you're filling out a certificate and validating that the home is built to meet the performance standard that I just mentioned. So why do we have the codes? They're in place to ensure that buildings that are being built to be durable, to be healthy, to be safe, and to retain and sustain value over time. Buildings as a whole in the construction industry has changed drastically from where it began and where our housing stock in Vermont began from. Older buildings that were built from dimensionally cut materials on site and local resources have inherent durability built into them because of the materials that were at use. As the construction industry has evolved and practices have changed and more engineered materials have become the standard for modern construction, and as we've done more to try to control our indoor environments, there's a lot of components at play, and understanding building science, which is the kind of the core that the codes are built upon here, is essential to ensure that outcome of durable, resilient, and healthy buildings. So that is really kind of the primary underpinning to understanding the codes and implementing the codes and making sure that buildings are being built in adherence to those standards. So ultimately, code compliant buildings will help the owners of those buildings save money and reduce their energy impact. Increasing affordability and building durability, those 2 things go hand in hand. Not understanding the basic principles of building science and how they apply to modern construction materials and practice can lead to major damages and degradation in a building in very short time, in very short order. So while people may argue that it costs more, quote unquote, to build a building to code, those costs that you may consider you're saving by not following the code at the beginning and at the time the house is built will come back in many times over by replacing systems that fail over time. Improving the quality of housing stock means a lot to a town or a municipality. If you have very broken down and poorly maintained buildings, your tax base isn't going to be all that great. You know, assessed values can be impacted by this. The comfort and health impacts to the occupants. We spend most of our time indoors, especially during the colder months of the year, and an unhealthy indoor environment has huge healthcare costs. It has social costs. It has economic costs. So there's many things tied to the quality of our indoor environments. And overall, you know, as I just kind of have touched upon here, this is a long-term view. It's not just short-term. So understanding the difference between short-term gains versus long-term gains when we're investing in our buildings. So another component that came into play in regard to the codes was a piece of legislation passed, I think probably about 6 to 8 years ago now, called Act 89. Act 89 was a bill that covered a lot of different things, but there was a component to it that addressed the residential and commercial building energy codes. So it basically put a little bit more of a connection between local permitting process and the reporting and compliance documentation side of things with the codes. So this is the basic requirements for a local official here. And it really is pretty simple and straightforward of what is required of a local official, a zoning administrator, a town manager, whomever it is in that government that is responsible or somehow engaged in permitting or zoning of applications or building permits, et cetera. But the basic requirement is that town officials must provide either the residential or commercial code information to permit applicants when a building or zoning permit is applied for. So we'll cover what that means and show you what that content covers. But basically, it means that when you're issuing a building permit for a new project, that information about the code and what is required is provided to the permit applicant. The other piece that was triggered by the Act 89 law was that any towns that issue a certificate of occupancy must have the code certificate filed with the town prior to issuing that CO. So the certificate must be submitted to the town, signed, and the town record that document, as well as the builder or homeowner having submitted that same document to the Department of Public Service. And we'll talk about that compliance part a little bit more detail further on. But that's another factor involved here now at the local municipal official level. And also, municipalities have the option now of adopting the stretch code, which is a more stringent performance requirement than what the base code requires. And we'll cover that in more detail here as well. As I said, you know, there is not a regulatory agency in the state of Vermont overseeing code compliance. There's no code officials. Efficiency Vermont does not have a role in code enforcement. So it really, again, it's a self-reporting code by the builder or the person certifying the home as meeting the code. So any building that fails to meet the requirements of RBES or CBs and or is not verified as having met those codes, a homeowner can take civil action against the person who built the building. And those damages can include costs to repair or modify or remedy the building to be made compliant. They can include the additional costs that were incurred because of the building being not compliant to the code for energy use. Covers attorney's fees, legal fees that would be associated with that. So it is not, there is a history of projects that have needed to be brought into code compliance by a builder after the fact, after they've been built at the builder's cost, because the builder was not aware of tenets of the code, or just, you know, components were missed throughout the process. Claims must be filed within 6 years as a claim against a lack of RBES compliance or damages incurred by lack of compliance with RBES. This does not mean that a builder would not be liable for other performance issues with the building outside of that 6-year window. It just means that further issues that may be that may manifest themselves with time would not be a direct claim under RBES non-compliance. It would be a claim under failure for the building or whatever aspect that lands under. And more at this point, 20 plus years on with the code being in place and being law, it is pretty well ingrained in the mortgage and lending process at this point. So most lenders and titles attorneys are looking for the code certificates in order to close loans and move projects through the financing phase. That being said, a lack of a code certificate does not cloud the title of the property. So a sale can go through without a code certificate being filed with the town, with the state. It's at the buyer's risk at that point. So that lack of certificate may raise some questions as to value or durability. Some banks won't issue a mortgage without that certificate being available and being valid. And as I said, title attorneys, mortgage underwriters are regularly looking for valid code certificates during title searches at this point. So I'll pause here, and anybody has any questions, feel free to, again, raise your hand or drop a message in the chat. Okay, keep rolling then. So RBES, the requirements of the code applies to both new and existing buildings. So it's not just a new construction code. It's primarily designed and written to serve new construction, but the basic performance requirements of the code do apply to aspects of existing homes as well. Primarily, that's going to be additions, major alterations, and renovations. It does not mean that an existing home that was built 100 years ago needs to be brought up to comply with the current performance standards. So it doesn't mean that you have to make full-scale changes at that level when remodeling a home, but there are specific provisions and requirements around work done in an existing building. So in general, what buildings must comply, all new residential and commercial projects. So this means any new single family homes. So single family residential is what RBES covers. All additions need to meet the requirements for new construction. So, that means if you are adding on to an existing home, you're essentially treating it as building that part as a new house. So it needs to meet the full performance requirements of the 2020 RBES in that circumstance. Renovations, this is where if you're exposing exterior areas of an existing home, an existing building, those building cavities need to be insulated before they're closed back up. It doesn't mean that they need to be brought up to the specific performance requirements for new construction, but it means that if you are exposing these areas of the building, they can't be left uninsulated or unmodified. If you're replacing mechanical equipment in an existing building, replacing a heating system or components thereof, those new components and those new systems need to be meet the requirements for the new code. So there is in Chapter 5 of the code that covers the requirements for additions, renovations, alterations, and goes into more detail what the specifics are there. And with that being said, remodeling projects that don't expose those exterior portions of a building do not need to be brought into any level of compliance. Repairing systems that are within an existing building do not need to trigger compliance as well. And there is a specific carve out for owner builder projects. So we'll cover that here in just a moment. Basically, it means that if you are building your own home and are truly the director and GC and running the whole project on yourself and dictating the outcomes, and you will live in that home, you are exempt from meeting the full performance requirements for new construction. So more definitively here, what are we defining as residential buildings? So these are low-rise residential, 1 or 2 family residential dwellings. Multifamily housing that's 3 stories or less needs to meet the requirements for the residential code. Multifamily that's greater than 3 stories needs to meet the provisions for the commercial code. It doesn't include commercial buildings, but if you have a mixed use building where you have commercial retail space on ground level and residential units above that, that you have the commercial code requirements being in play for the commercial use, the retail side of things, and then the residential code being in place for the residential units that are going to be above. So when it comes to additions, only the addition needs to meet the code requirements for new construction. Again, it doesn't trigger that the whole rest of the house needs to be brought up to the standard. If you are doing alterations, renovations, and window or equipment replacements, as I was kind of mentioning just a moment ago, those are actions that trigger compliance with current standards. But repairs to things here, so if you're repairing part of the duct system of an existing furnace, that doesn't trigger any compliance with new standards. If you're replacing a pane of glass in an existing window sash, that doesn't mean you need to update the whole window. So there are definitely exemptions there. Stretch code, again, is a higher standard of performance that's in the code, and we'll cover that in detail here in a moment. But stretch code comes into play for any developments that fall under the jurisdiction of Act 250. So if there is a development project underway in your town where an Act 250 permit has been filed and it falls under the jurisdiction of Act 250, then the buildings to be built, the residential buildings to be built in that development need to meet a higher level of performance here, which is what the stretch code requires. And we'll cover that in detail here in just a minute. So just more specifically, what are we covering with RBES? So we're talking about Vermont and our climate zone, which is climate zone 6, specific R values that are relevant to our climate. Requirements around building air tightness. If anything that building science research has shown us over the past decades is that making a tight building envelope to prevent the intermixing of air from between inside and outside is crucial towards building durability, occupant comfort, energy use, many things. Moisture is primary issue there. So that's a major part of the code. Mechanical ventilation, we do need to provide adequate and well-maintained indoor air quality to manage pollutants and moisture, relative humidity within a building. So active mechanical ventilation is a requirement. Combustion safety, making sure that what we're using in our buildings to heat and cool them are not creating unsafe and unhealthy conditions because of not drafting appropriately and not being tuned appropriately. So combustion safety is a big part of this. Properly sizing heating and cooling equipment. Oversized equipment has a huge energy penalty, a huge cost penalty, and a durability penalty as well. So, making sure that the equipment that's being installed in buildings to heat and cool them is appropriately matched to the needs of the building is important. Insulating slabs and foundations. Concrete is an excellent conductor of heat, and not insulating it is a major ongoing source of heat loss and comfort issues. Moisture management aligns directly with mechanical ventilation requirements, and moisture unchecked in a building has huge impacts, not only on potential for mold and mildew growth within the building, but on indoor air quality, on occupant health, on building durability. So a big part of the puzzle here. And then, appropriate duct and distribution design for the heating and cooling systems. Efficient lighting, which is easier than ever now to have efficient lighting in buildings as a general rule. Good performing windows. Windows are a long-term investment in trying to get the best performance possible at the time of construction. Makes sense. And finally, the certification piece, making sure that the building can be verified to have met these performance standards. Any questions here? All right. So one distinction to call out here at this point is that the code exists, and apologies for the lack of updated here, but I don't have images to pull up for the 2020 codes yet. But there is a distinction between the actual full code language, which is published by the ICC and is the full rule of the law. And that is found through the ICC website and available there digitally. And then the RBES Code Handbook, which is a document that Efficiency Vermont and the Department of Public Service collaborate on as a guidebook to help understand and implement the code. They are two different documents, and it's important to understand what one does and one doesn't. So the full code, the full law itself is contained in the ICC document and through the ICC website. And the guidebook, the handbook, is published by the Energy Code Assistance Center, which Efficiency Vermont runs, again, and as a guide to understanding the code. And this is available from Efficiency Vermont. You can reach out to the Energy Code Assistance Center and we can send copies of that handbook to you. This is one of the things that you can provide to permit applicants to meet the intent of the requirement for local officials of providing code information at time of permit applicant or permit application. So that is one of the things that can be used and provided to provide permit applicants with the information on the code. But ultimately, one shouldn't be confused with the other. One of them you can is a good kind of practical application guide to the full rule itself, but the full rule of the ICC document should be referenced for compliance. So again, the code itself can be found at the ICC website. And then the code handbook can also be found digitally on the Department of Public Service website here. So you can download a copy of it there. And also Efficiency Vermont has printed bound copies available as well. So if you'd like to request getting copies of those to have on hand in your town office, you can contact the Energy Code Assistance Center at this number here. And I apologize that PowerPoint has its own time agenda today. So let's try to stay ahead of it, prompting me to jump along here. But here's the contact info for both the Energy Code Assistance Center and the Vermont Department of Public Service. And we'll have these up available at the end of the slideshow again as well. So now let's get into some of the details about the code itself and some of the things that are the actual performance requirements and parameters around complying with the code, not just from the performance standpoint but what are the options for meeting those standards and showing and validating compliance through the code certificate. So again, we're in a updated version of the code, which has been in place since September 1st of 2020. And this is changes from the 2015 code. So there are new installation requirements, and it's packaged in a different way and presented in a different way than it was in 2015. So we'll talk about that in more detail. Then there are also more options for ventilation. Again, mechanical ventilation is huge, and it's a major part of complying with the code. Should be a major part of any new construction. So there's more detail and options in the code for complying with mechanical ventilation requirements. There is a testing and verification requirement in the code here and now as well, which is basically requires that the air leakage of the building envelope is tested and validated upon project completion. Electric resistance heat is mostly prohibited now in the code. There are some clarifications where it can be used, which can come into play. Minimum electric vehicle charging is starting to be a factor in the code as well. This comes into play for stretch code compliant projects as well as multifamily. It's not a standard requirement for single family residential homes at this time. And then as well, solar or PV ready components are required for stretch code as well. So as I said, there's this performance requirement, meaning like the meat of the code, like what R values do you need where, what kind of windows do you need to put in, how much ventilation do you need, et cetera. Those are the actual performance requirements, how to put the building together to have it perform to meet the intent of the code. And then the second leg of this is how do you show that compliance, that you've followed those guidelines and you've used those R values and windows and ventilation equipment and sized heating and cooling, et cetera. So that brings us to our three methods that you can choose to comply with the code. We have the prescriptive method, which changed significantly from 2015, which is a set of tables and specifications to follow. The second one is using a online software tool called ResCheck, which a builder can input information about the building into this software, and it will do calculations to determine if all of those things together comply with the intent of the code. And then the third method is having a home energy rating or a HERS rating done, which follows closely the software method of ResCheck, but it requires a third party to be doing the verification, and it goes into quite a bit more detail than ResCheck requires. So let's talk about those each individually and the differences between them. So the prescriptive method is quite simple. Essentially, you have a table of 5 different packages of performance you can choose. You pick one of those packages and you meet all the requirements in that package, and you meet the intent of the code. So it's simple. You don't have to do any calculations really. You don't need to work with a third party to make that happen. That being said, you are bound by the requirements of that package that you choose. So it can be inflexible to some extent, depending on the design and intent for the home. There's certain conditions you must comply with by following those packages. There's some other components here that are less crucial anymore, but it is limited because it's kind of a it's a choose a path, not choose your own adventure. You got to follow a direct, distinct path to comply prescriptively. The second method here, the second option, is using the ResCheck software, the online ResCheck tool. So using that tool, you are specifying the performance values for different building components, above grade walls, windows, foundation, slabs, roofs, et cetera, in inputting that information and content into the software. And then the software, through its algorithms, will define whether or not that combination of performance and component design meets the intent of the code. And if what you put in doesn't, then you can adjust those values and factors to see what you need to tweak in the design to meet the code. So it does have, advantages for giving you options for a wide variety of designs and performance characteristics. You can still do it on your own. You don't need to work with a third party to do it. You just need the ability and the understanding of how to work with the software online. You do get a report generated from it, which you can use when filing your code certificate. But it does require that you're understanding the software and how to work with it online. You have to understand some more methods for defining performance characteristics for the building, understanding the difference between R values and U values, understanding exposures for the building, et cetera. And you need to pay attention to the whole building as a whole. So it is more detailed in its process and effort to comply. And there are some specific enhanced performance requirements called for in the code that you would not need to meet if you chose to use the prescriptive tables approach. If you go with ResCheck, you have to up the ante a little bit with mechanical ventilation and building airtightness. And finally, the third option is using the home energy rating method. So you're working with a third party who is going to review the design for the building and do some preliminary modeling and evaluation to see if what the proposed design is, to see if the proposed design will meet the intent and requirements of the code. A benefit of that is that you get that feedback and you get that understanding of whether or not you're going to comply with the code before you put a hole in the ground, before you even start the construction process. Whereas some of these, the other methods potentially can leave you till the end to define if you've met the code or not. It does require that you have that third party do inspections on the building. So it does require that a inspection occurs after insulation is installed and before drywall is put up, and then a final inspection and performance testing upon project completion. But then the outcome here is that the third party doing the rating is the one who provides all of the code compliance information and the code certificate ready to be signed and filed with the town and with the state. So it offers a high degree of flexibility. Again, it's not putting the calculation work and all of that on the shoulders of the builder or the person certifying the home. You're working with a third party. You get the advantage of being able to benefit from doing better work and making the building envelope airtight. Passive solar gain and renewable energy is a way to gain points essentially to meet the code as well. So it's not just all reliant on the performance of the building envelope. So it is quite comprehensive in its scope. You do need to hire someone to do this. That's how it works in most states or many states, and some of our neighbors here in the Northeast, where actually the code requires hiring a third-party rater to do the code compliance work for a new construction project. It's not required here in Vermont. Home energy rating method is an option for code compliance. Efficiency Vermont has offered this as a service to those who enroll in our new construction program, and we've done this for many, many years and continue to do so. So you can get a HERS rating done for quote unquote free by enrolling and working with us in our program. That being said, though, our program, our new construction program, requires a higher level of performance than what the base code requires. So in order to get that service from Efficiency Vermont, you need to meet Efficiency Vermont's performance requirements, which are going to go above code. But it is an option. And there are options to work with third-party raters here in Vermont as well. And we hope that that path will continue as well, that there'll be more options for third-party raters in Vermont outside of Efficiency Vermont's role this year and years ahead. Any questions? All right, well, let's cover what these actual performance requirements are. So this right here is the table that covers the packages for the prescriptive compliance option in the code. So as you can see, there's 5 packages here that you can choose from. The log homes package has its own specific performance requirements, which can be found in a different standard. So the performance requirements aren't shown here on this table in the RBES code. But so essentially that leaves us with four packages, 4 options to choose from to comply. This table is a frame of reference for performance for not just the prescriptive packages, but also for guiding people towards what ResCheck or HERS would require as well. But essentially, you're looking at 3 options here that require a level of continuous insulation on above grade walls, meaning you're not just putting insulation between the framing cavities, but you're providing some sort of continuous layer of insulation, either on the inside or outside of those walls or as a part of the wall design itself. But this covers attic and ceiling insulation values, wall values, floors, foundation insulation requirements here, basement crawl space walls, slabs, either heated slabs on grade or below grade, window minimum performance requirements. So this kind of gives you the nuts and bolts of what needs to be specified in different components of the building to meet the intent of the code. And again, this is base requirements here. So this is, you can't build anything less performing than this in Vermont for new construction. A change in the 2020 code is that along with meeting those requirements laid out in the packages and fulfilling all of the different performance specifications in each building assembly type based on the package, based on the square footage of the house, the actual size of conditioned space for that house, a number of points are needed to be attained as well. So we're going to cover those points requirements here in just a moment, but essentially, if you're building a 2,000 square foot house, you need to meet all of the requirements in whatever package you choose out of those 4 previously shown, and then gain five points through another table, which I'll show you here in just a moment. If you're building to a 4,000 square foot house, you need to gain 7 points, greater than 4,000 feet, 10 points. So this is different, this is new, this is not something that had been in the code previously, but it comes into play now, and this is determined by the finished conditioned living space. So basically the floor area of the house that's heated and cooled within the building, and that would include basements as well. They're considered part of that thermal envelope. So these tables include ways to basically up the ante from what the base code requirements are in that table. So you can gain points by upping the performance of windows and walls. So you can gain anywhere from 1 to 3 points based on putting in better performing windows or adding more insulation in different wall or ceiling areas. You can gain points by making the building envelope itself more airtight and verifying that via testing, as well as improving the mechanical ventilation options for the home. So you can move from a exhaust-only ventilation system to a balanced heat recovery ventilation here and gain some points. And then putting in more efficient heating and cooling equipment gains points as well. This points table also takes into account water use, which had not been a part of the code before. So you can gain points by using low flow fixtures within the home. And I'm sorry, my slides keep doing this to me. So that's part of the equation here as well. Putting in a more efficient water heater, such as a heat pump water heater, is a way to gain points. And then also, while not required for base code in any way, renewables and planning for renewables or installing renewables is another way to gain points, again, based on the square footage of the house. Any questions on that? Okay. So as I've been mentioning here to this point, there's a stretch code as well. So the stretch code essentially is a separate code that exists alongside with the base code. Stretch code is more stringent. It provides requirements for higher R values in the building. It mandates balanced heat recovery ventilation, whereas you can use just exhaust only to meet the base code. So stretch code, as mentioned before, comes into play for any project that falls under the jurisdiction of Act 250. And then also municipalities, individual towns and municipalities can choose to adopt the stretch code as their local requirement. And because it's more stringent than the base code, the local requirement, trumps the base code. The only municipality in the state of Vermont that's done this to date is South Burlington. So if you're building in South Burlington, you need to meet this higher level of performance called out by the stretch code. Other towns have considered adopting stretch code as a local requirement, and that's kind of continuously in discussion. But as of now, South Burlington is the only town in the state that has actually adopted it locally. So stretch code packages, there's 3 instead of 5 here. You're moving to a requirement of continuous insulation for any above grade wall, so you can't just put fiberglass or mineral wool or cellulose or spray foam in the framing cavities, you have to do a continuous insulation layer of some type as well. A little bit better performing window is required. Again, balanced heat recovery ventilation instead of exhaust only. So it ups the ante for performance a bit above what base code requires. And as with base code, there is a requirement again for points. So same table as far as square footages go, but more points required here. So you're up a couple points, few points, depending on the square feet of the house, than you would be for base code. So now that we've covered all the reasons why you need to meet code and what the code requires, there are some exemptions and some carve-outs. They are quite specific in what's allowed, but let's take a look at them. So exemptions to meeting the requirements of RBES. So these are exemptions to meeting the full performance requirements for new construction. So everything we've just talked about, here's some ways to avoid that. Extreme low energy use. So this is a carryover from previous versions of the code, less than 1 watt per square foot of energy load. So this is not really achievable. You know, practical terms, this would basically for like a 2,000 square foot house would basically let you run a microwave, a handful of light bulbs and a refrigerator, and that would be your maximum amount of energy use to avoid meeting the intent of the code. So, and not really a viable exemption option. Mobile homes have their own requirements that are covered through a national standard. So these are mobile homes are distinct from modular homes. Modular homes need to meet the full requirements of new construction for RVs. But mobile homes built on a chassis that you can put wheels onto and you can roll it away, those fall under this Title VI National Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Standards. So they have their own requirements. But if you are putting a mobile home on a site-built basement or crawl space, that basement or crawl space needs to meet the requirements for code. So any buildings that aren't heated or cooled, non-conditioned buildings do not need to meet the code. So, you know, if you have a garage that's not heated or separate from the house, that doesn't need to meet the code. If you have an outbuilding that's not conditioned, that doesn't need to meet the code. Hunting camps, summer camps, so basically buildings that exist for seasonal use and don't have a full heating and cooling conditioning system in them, aren't insulated, those buildings don't need to meet the requirements for code. And historic buildings can apply for exemptions as well when you're doing renovations or alterations to an existing historic building. There are options for being exempt of certain components of the code for those building types as well. The one exemption that comes into play more often is the owner-builder definition. So if you're an owner-builder, you are exempt from meeting the full performance requirements for RVs. You still have to file a certificate that states what you did build and areas that may not be compliant with the code. And that certificate looks essentially the same as the standard RV certificate, and I'll show you that here in a moment. But it does allow for someone who is truly acting as their own builder and will live in that building to not meet the full performance requirements. So as defined here, that owner must direct the details of construction and must live in the building. So this can't be someone who's building a house on spec and is going to sell it, you know, after they're complete with the house, but must be building it for your own use. That certificate still needs to be filed, as I mentioned. And any of the things that do not align with code need to be indicated on that certificate when it's filed. Any questions here? Okay. So we've covered the performance requirements, the general specifications for the code. Now we need to file the certificate. So how this process works is, so as a municipal official, you have issued a building permit for a new home. You've provided information about RBES to the permit applicant at the time that they filed their permit. That builder or homeowner has then gone ahead and learned and read the code and enjoyed every moment of their new learning experience, and put all of that into practice and into play, and has built a building fully compliant with RBES. The builder then fills out the code certificate, signs off on it, and then files that with you or with the town official. Again, it can be the zoning administrator, it could be a planner, whomever it is who is involved in the permitting process at the town office level. So that certificate is filed with the town, put in the town records, and a copy of that is also filed with the Vermont Department of Public Service. When that's filed, a copy of the compliance certificate is then posted in the home, typically on the electrical panel or in the mechanical room somewhere that's obvious and present in the house to be found. And that's the process. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, though, many towns have never seen a code certificate filed, and the actual filing of certificates is unfortunately thin compared to the work that's going on out there in the marketplace. I think we're seeing more homes that are mostly being built to comply with the code, but they're not following through with the actual code certificate completion and filing aspect of things. So that's just an aside. But the documents can be found on the Department of Public Service website. So you can go there and you can download the copies of the current code certificate. You can also find the copies of the 2015 certificate still available there as well. So if you have a project that began last June and is now completing around now or sometime this year, that should be getting a 2015 code certificate filed rather than a 2020 code certificate filed. So again, those are found on the Department of Public Service website and can be downloaded from there. So the certificate itself, it just provides the details about the house, general details, and then the specific details around performance. It is basically the declaration of intent here and conformity to the code, and it's the builder signing off that it meets these performance requirements and has been built to the standard. And again, posting in the house with the town and with the state. So we look at it in more detail here. You're putting in general information about the code, start date and finish date here at the top, whether it was an Act 250 permitted project. You put your permit number there if it is. Putting in definitions about the building size, square footage, bedrooms, etc. Project description here as well. So this would be where you'd be putting into play things, whether it's a single family new home, multifamily, or work on an existing building. And then you have here's your 3 options for compliance. You have, if you've chosen to use the prescriptive approach and chosen a package, one of those 5 packages to comply with, that's where you check this box here. And then you would put in, this is all the points options that are available to comply based on the square footage. So you would write in which package you chose to comply with. Say you chose package 1, you put package 1 here, and then you check off the boxes of the areas that you chose to up the ante to gain points. If you didn't use the prescriptive method and the builder used res check, this is where you'd fill that out. So you'd check option 2, res check. You'd need to have put in a balanced heat recovery ventilation unit. So you'd be checking that box as well. And then you'd be putting your actual numerical score from the res check software here as your outcome. Similarly, this is the 3rd option for HERS. So if you had hired a HERS rater to do your code verification for you, you would put your rating number, the numerical number that comes from the HERS report here as well. There's 2 different line items to fill out for that. And then the name of the person who is the certified HERS rater who did that work for the building owner. That all being said, no matter which option you choose, this next section would be where the builder would be putting in the R values for the different components of the building. So this would get filled out no matter which performance option is chosen. So you're putting in R values for basement slabs, walls, floors, ceilings, windows, etc. All that information is captured here. As I mentioned earlier, performance testing is required to verify the airtightness of the building envelope. So this is the section where that data would be inputted. So you're going to be putting in the testing results from the person that was hired to do the performance testing. And that information is also captured here as well, who the person was that did the performance testing. Next section covers ventilation. Again, mechanical ventilation. We're not talking vented roofs or rafters here. We're talking mechanical equipment that's used to maintain good indoor air quality. So you're going to indicate here whether it's a heat recovery balance system or if it's exhaust only, just using bath fans on controls. You're going to put information about how much air that system moves. So this is the upper half of the certificate. Then looking at the bottom half of the certificate, combustion safety, you'd be verifying if you do have combustion equipment in the building that triggers aspects of the code for compliance, you'd be indicating that here. This next section is details on the heating and cooling equipment for the house. So the code does require that you're actually doing appropriate load calculations to determine the size and loads for the house, size of the equipment and loads of the house. So that information is going to be indicated here. And then you're going to be putting in what the design load for the building is, the size of the heating or cooling equipment, the efficiency rating of the heating and cooling equipment here. So this is for heating, this is for cooling. If there's ductwork, there are some requirements for testing and verifying leakage of the ductwork. So that information would be filled out here. If it's not a ducted forced air system, then this is not applicable. And then finally, some other components that can come into play. You'd be checking off anything relevant under this section. Then the final piece here is that if you're a builder and you're the one filling out the code certificate, the builder is going to be certifying to the owner of the building, so the name of the homeowner here, that the above information is accurate and correct, and that the building has been built in accordance with the RBES standards. The builder is going to sign and print their name here, company name, phone number, and then this is what, at the town level, this is the certificate you'll be receiving, signed and completed and filing. And then the builder is also then responsible to send a copy of that document, as I mentioned, to the Department of Public Service. Any questions on that? Okay. Similarly,
1 second, Steve. We do have a question.
Okay.
So Virginia, I'm going to allow you to speak if you want to unmute yourself.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so in the other requirements section, the single family level 1 EV charging space, is that stretch code only or?
Correct. Yep,
Okay,
that is a stretch code requirement, or, you know, if someone chose to gain a point,
yeah, that was my question, is
here.
how come it's not listed up here as a point gaining item?
Yeah, do they not hit in as a level? Yeah, they have a level 2 EV ready here. So yeah, technically speaking, if they'd used it for a points gain, that this would be what they'd be filling out up here in this section rather than down here.
But how come we can't have that as a point under the basic?
It might have been just a miss when the document was compiled here. I'd have to go back to the points table to see if it calls out specifically the level 1 or level 2 distinction as a points option.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously the level 1 is easier to provide.
Yep.
You just have to have an outlet on the outside of the building. So
Yeah, no, I'd have to go back to the points table to see if you can gain a point by just doing a level 1 or if it had to be a level 2 in order to gain a point.
okay, it seems like an oversight. If it's
Could
not
be.
there. Yep.
Could be.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Owner builder disclosure statement, again, it's very similar, basically the same structure as the standard certificate. So we'll show that here. So again, same thing, you know, you're filling out information about the building. You know, ideally, if you're an owner builder, you would have been using one of these packages, one of these options here to guide your specifications for the building. So as relevant, the owner should still be choosing one of these options and putting in what they've done to comply in these areas. But at a minimum, you know, this section needs to be filled out in detail, because this is where the owner would be disclosing if they have built components of the building that do not comply fully with the base code requirements. So thermal envelope section, air sealing, blower door tests, all of these sections need to be still completed by the owner. Same here, you know, the expectation is all this detail would still be provided in the code certificate. But at the bottom is where we see the difference. So there's no builder signing off on it here. So it just says that, you know, I certify this building has not been constructed in accordance with the building RB standards. You know, if you're an owner builder and you're following the code completely, you've done everything right, you should just use the standard code certificate. But if you're an owner builder who has, for whatever reasons, not been able to meet the full requirements of the code, this would be the option you have to still file the certificate as mandated. So that's where the primary difference here is, how it's filled out at the bottom of the certificate. So I've beaten this point over quite a few times, but this is, you know, there's actually, sorry, I thought I was looking at something else. What's required of town officials, again, is very simple. There's not a big onus on the shoulders of local officials to do anything with the code certificate other than verify receipt of it and file it in the town records. A local official is not required, unless local law states that a local official is serving as a code official and is looking at the certificate for accuracy and detail of the content provided. You know, if that condition, it does not exist, if there's not an actual, you know, building inspector or local code official in town, the only requirement of a town official receiving a code certificate from a builder or homeowner is just that it's been filled out and it's been signed. So local officials are not required to validate the accuracy of the information on the code certificate. So that piece, and then requiring, you know, the permit at the time of a permit application, that information about the code is provided to the permit applicant, are really the only two you know, mandated requirements of local officials. So that being said, that, you know, again, any municipality that does issue a certificate of occupancy would be considered in default of the requirements of Act 89 if that CO was issued without receipt of a signed and completed RBES or CBES certificate. So so that should always be making sure that that's being followed and adhered to if you're issuing COs. If a town doesn't issue certificates of occupancy, the builder in that town, anyone building a home in that town, the expectation and the requirement is still there that they file the code certificate upon completion to the town. But the town is under no obligation to chase down code certificates if they're not issuing certificates of occupancy. So it's on the builder's onus and builder's shoulders to meet the certification requirement. And if the builder does not file the certificate, there's no penalty or again, anything landing on a local official in that circumstance. It lands on the weight of the builder if they do not file the certificate as required. So code assistance, Efficiency Vermont runs the Energy Code Assistance Center. So we're here to provide any level of support to the code, to builders, homeowners, municipal officials, et cetera. So any questions relating to the content or application of the codes can be sent our way. So that number here, you can call that number to reach our code support folks through customer support, and then also through other resources in Efficiency Vermont as well. So feel free to take advantage of that and put that to use. Make note of that to prevent applicants of what as well, that they can seek out that help and support from the Energy Code Assistance Center. Also can provide support through the new construction programs that we offer. So these are available for both residential and commercial new construction. You have the opportunity of having a consultant from Efficiency Vermont work with the project team from beginning to end to help talk through technical and compliance requirements. And you'll also, the builder or enrollee will also receive incentives for successful completion with the requirements of our program. Again, the HERS rating is done for people who successfully meet the requirements of our program. So definitely an option as well for anyone building a new home in Vermont. And opportunities at the municipal level. You know, many towns have energy committees, and those energy committees can do presentations and work on their own about the codes and building science and the opportunity for building efficient buildings. Efficiency Vermont is happy to contribute to those efforts as well. You know, support people at the community level to educate on what should be considered when either remodeling, renovating, or building a new home. Language on town websites, you know, you can link to information from Efficiency Vermont, create your own content in support of what the codes require and building science in general. There's ways to incorporate things into local zoning and planning policies as well. So, you know, more of that can be more integrated into those local requirements. Stretch code can be adopted locally, as mentioned earlier. You know, that'd be raising the bar of performance in your community. You know, so, you know, state of Vermont, there's limits in what local officials and municipalities can do by way of staffing and resources to move things forward at the local level. But collectively, there's a lot of great resources available here in the state to support efficient and healthy and durable buildings. So definitely reach out. Myself and others here are very happy to work with you to help develop pathways to be able to bring more compliance at the local level, or at least awareness. So feel free to reach out to us. As I mentioned, Energy Code Assistance Center is always available. Vermont Department of Public Service is the actual entity who quote unquote owns the code. So if you have direct questions about the code from the state level, you can reach out to the Department of Public Service as well. The ICC, or the International Code Council, again, is where the code itself lives, the document lives. You'll also find the other relevant code information to residential construction in general, because there are other codes that apply to residential construction here in Vermont: the International Building Code, the International Residential Code, those codes, the International Mechanical Code. All those codes cover other aspects of general construction, including things around load requirements and sizing of structural members, and fuel and use of or fuel safety and other components of mechanical system design. So all those resources are available through the ICC. And Efficiency Vermont's website as well. We have energy code support link on our website. There's also quick links there to some of these other resources I just mentioned, some of the code resources such as the code certificates, etc. We have ongoing trainings and events that we do for contractors and builders professionals throughout the state to keep them informed and updated on best practice, building science, and codes as well. So we do our best to try to keep ahead of this and provide a balanced level of resource and support to all players here throughout the state. So that covers it. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me directly as well with any questions. We still have a little bit of time here, so if there's any further questions, anything anybody wants to bring to light or discuss, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining, and hope you have a great weekend. But I'll stick around here for another couple of minutes.
We do have a question from Sally. So Sally, you can speak if you'd like.
Thanks. This was really informative. I really appreciate it.
Great, Sally. Thanks.
Oh, and so I'm wondering, like in my town, I don't even know if there are other officials in my town on this call, but I had put out an email about it to the town administrator and a zoning person. So I don't really know if they're on or not, but it seems like it would be great to get together and talk about it among those folks so that I know what is being done and what isn't and what I can do. And, you know, so we could coordinate on how we can educate the town through the town website or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
What town are you in?
Bristol.
Bristol.
I'm the energy committee chair.
Great.
And so I will definitely try to be in touch with them and see where things are at. And then we'll look to you probably for any, you know, or the site so I can find about language to use to, you know, help talk about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's what we're here for. I'm happy to do that. You know, pre-COVID times, I was out and about meeting and available with local municipal officials to talk about this stuff as well and help put things in place. We are recording this session, so we'll have this posted to our website on our online training session here probably in the next week or two. So it'll be available for other people to view there as well. But yeah, please do. Happy to work with you.
All right, thanks so much.
You're welcome. All right.
Great, Steve. I think those are all the questions we have for now. Certainly welcome folks to complete the survey at the end and reach out to us with questions or additional requests for support.
Great. Well, thanks again to everyone for joining. And yeah, please do feel free to reach out. Happy to work with you on whatever level I can. So thanks again. Have a great weekend.